When the Abbasids emerged, there was no longer a new wave of conquest. There was not a conquest, but a world left behind by conquests, an empire that had expanded, but whose internal structure had begun to disintegrate, a social and cultural plurality that was becoming increasingly impossible to govern from the center. Societies living under the same political roof, but not belonging to the same historical world. At this point, the problem is not a change of dynasty. The problem is that the political form itself has reached its limit. The Abbasids were born within this limit, not as an alternative, but as a necessity. That is, not as a will to build a state, but as the reconstruction of an already established but no longer functioning order. Therefore, Abbasid history is not a narrative of rise, but a history of the necessity of re-establishing a political form. The Umayyad order was the last great expression of this old form. It was built on the internal logic of the age of conquest, to expand. But expansion, after a while, does not produce a manageable whole. On the contrary, it produces historical layers that touch but cannot be integrated. As the empire grew, the center had to govern not a single society, but worlds that were interconnected but did not belong to each other. The problem that emerged at this point was not merely an administrative issue. It was a question concerning the political form itself. By what principle can an empire keep this plurality outside itself together? The Umayyad order gave a limited answer to this question because its political horizon was determined by the Arab tribal-centered structure produced by the conquest process. This structure read the empire not as a horizontal plurality, but as a hierarchical whole, spreading from the center to the periphery. However, over time, this hierarchy began to malfunction because the periphery was no longer the periphery. Separate historical centers with their own cities, their own memories, and their own administrative and cultural densities had emerged. Thus, the empire ceased to be a center-periphery model, and instead, a multi-layered, fragmented, and tense historical structure was born. And it is precisely at this point of transformation that the Abbasids appear, not as a continuation, but as a necessary result of this structural break. At this point, the Abbasid world ceases to be merely a political structure. It turns into a field of transformation where different histories, societies, and institutions are reshaped under the same authority. While Arabs, Persians, and Turks entered this order while preserving their own historical roles, different traditions of knowledge and thought were also reinterpreted within a single world of meaning in the same process. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Iranian political thought were not elements transferred as they were, but forms of knowledge resignified within the new way of thinking of the Islamic world. That is why fields like theology, kalam, jurisprudence, fiqh, and mysticism, tasawwuf, emerged not just as academic disciplines, but as structural answers to the questions born of this multi-layered world. Thus, the Abbasid order ceased to be a structure where different elements existed side by side. It transformed into a civilization synthesis where differences were re-established within a single political and intellectual system. In the Abbasid order, the Arab element is not just a historical identity. It is the spine of legitimacy that keeps the state standing. At the center of this spine is the caliphate. The new Abbasid power, which began with Abu al-Abbas al-Safa, drew its strength not only from military success, but also from the reconstruction of the idea of the caliphate, which had a place in the historical memory of Islam. During the reign of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, this power became even clearer. Personal power gradually transformed into an institutional state mind. In this structure, the caliph is not just the person who governs, he is the center representing the existence of the state. The sermon, khutbah, is read in his name, money is minted in his name, and official correspondence circulates with his authority. Thus, the state transformed into a structure that speaks from a single center. The language of this center is Arabic, but Arabic is not only an administrative language, it is also the language of law, science, and thought, because it already carries a strong authority as the language of the Quran. Therefore, Arabic becomes both the public face of the state and the language of the circulation of knowledge. As a result, the Arab element in the Abbasid world is much more than an ethnic identity. It is the common historical language that establishes the legitimacy of the state, carries its knowledge, and forms the common ground of thought. In the Abbasid order, the Persian element represents the invisible but most decisive layer of the state, that is, not the management itself, but how management is made possible. Because as the empire grew, legitimacy alone was not enough. For an order to work, records are needed, plans are needed, and continuity is needed. At this point, the Iranian political tradition re-emerged on the historical scene. In the Abbasid palace, this influence is seen most concretely through the Barmakids. Yahya al-Barmaki and his family, next to the caliph, became not just advisors, but the real administrative mind that established the functioning of the state. During this period, the Baghdad palace began to function more like a management mechanism than a center of power. Decisions are prepared here, written down, and distributed to the entire empire. Behind this system is a deeper thought, the state relying on rules and writing, not on individuals. At this point, figures like Ibn al-Muqaffa came to the fore. His translations and political texts were not just a literary activity, but an effort to redefine how the state should think. Governance was no longer the realm of instantaneous decisions, but of written reason, protocol, and order. Thus, the Persian element in the Abbasid world became not a culture, but the bureaucratic mind and palace order that kept the state standing. If the Arabs established the legitimacy, the Persians established the state that operated this legitimacy. In the Abbasid order, the Turkish element represents the harshest and most decisive reality of the empire. There is no state without security, so the issue is not an ethnic contribution, but a direct structural need of the state. Because during the Abbasid period, the empire was no longer a simple structure protecting its borders. It had to both keep the inside together and balance the outside at the same time. At this point, the old tribal armies were insufficient, loyalty was fragmented, discipline was weak, and the connection with the center was loose. Thus, Turkish elements rose from within this break. Military groups coming particularly from the Khorasan and Transoxiana line gradually formed the core of the Abbasid army. This process was not just recruiting soldiers, but a complete reconstruction of the military structure. The most critical break became visible with the founding of the city of Samarra. The army, separating itself from the social and political chaos of Baghdad, was gathered in a special center. This was not a simple change of place. The army was no longer a force dispersed within society, but a professional coercive mechanism within the state, but separated from society. Turkish commanders became the most influential actors of this structure. Allegiance to the caliph was connected directly to the center. not to the tribe. Thus, military power ceased to be the sum of personal loyalties and transformed into a systematic and continuous state power. With this transformation, the Abbasid order settled on three basic layers. Arabs established the legitimacy, Persians operated the state, and the Turks provided the power that forced the continuation of this order. Seeing the Abbasid order only as a political structure remains incomplete, because this empire was also a center where knowledge was reconstructed. Not only people but also texts began to flow to Baghdad from different geographies. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, Iranian political thought, the Syriac medical tradition, each is a body of knowledge formed in its own language, in its own world. But with the Abbasid period, this knowledge entered a single process of transformation. They were translated into Arabic. This translation activity was not a simple transfer. It was more about the reconstruction of a way of thinking than moving the words of a text to another language. Because when a piece of knowledge passes into a new language, not only the expression changes, but the world of concepts that carries it is also reshaped. Thus, knowledge belonging to different civilizations found a single common area of circulation in Baghdad. But the real break starts here, because the issue is no longer just knowing. The issue is how knowledge will be grounded. This great accumulation of knowledge produced a new intellectual tension, different traditions of reason, different interpretations of faith, and different social realities met in the same center. And this encounter gave birth to new questions. How can reason and revelation stand together? What is true knowledge based on? How should society be organized? It is around these questions that new fields of thought formed. Theology, kalam, is an effort to ground faith with reason. Jurisprudence, fiqh, is the normative framework that establishes the order of the multiplying society. And mysticism, tasawwuf, is the field of meaning that opens up to the inner world of man within this structure. Thus, thought ceased to be a scattered activity and transformed into a systematic order of meaning produced by an empire. And the place where all these processes intersect is Baghdad. Here, there is the caliph, there is the vizier, there is the army, there are translators, scholars, merchants and scribes coming together in the same city. But what makes Baghdad special is not just this diversity. It is not just the fact that different elements exist side by side, but that they constantly transform each other within the same order. Thus, the Abbasid world became not just a state, but a civilization system where politics, knowledge, and society work together.